All right, hello out there, everybody. I think we're ready to get started. So today I wanted to answer a couple of the questions that came in yesterday that I didn't get a chance to dive into. There were a couple really good ones that got submitted, so I'm just going to dive into those, and then I wanted to just kind of chill and chat and see what other kinds of questions people had and just talk for a little bit about whatever kinds of things you guys are interested in, I'd say for the next 45 minutes or so. So I'm going to kick it off with these questions that came in yesterday. So they were all submitted through yesterday's stream. I'm not going to take any more in there just so I can pay attention to chat. But like I said, I'll hit these first. Before I do, though, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and all that stuff. I forgot to say it last time. The last video didn't do amazing. So I assume that now that I've said it, everybody will submit it and it'll go great. And everybody will share it everywhere, right? All right, let's switch over to the first question that I had that I didn't really get to jump into yesterday, which was how stressful is game programming development and what about design? And is it more stressful to be in management? And then also, it's kind of like a bunch of questions in one, but the last one was, is there an unwritten age ban or limitation in game dev committee? Or I assume that means communities. I'm going to answer these in reverse order. Because for the age ban, I would say probably not. There may be some thing that people have, I don't know. But in general, I have never seen anybody really discriminating based on age, either from being too young or too old. It's just not been an issue or something that I've seen. It could happen in other places. I don't know, though. I assume it just varies dramatically based on where you are. But what about stress? So game programming in general, I would say is not very stressful, at least not for me. There are some times when things get stressful. When it gets stressful, it's like there's a problem and you have no idea how you're going to solve it, right? That's I'd say the only real stressful scenario for me. I've got a problem and I got no clue how I'm going to fix it. I don't even have like an idea in my mind of what to think about, like what would be the option. That's the only time it gets really, really stressful. That or like emergency fixes, like you busted something and suddenly everything's going to crap and you got to fix it, then it's stressful. But in general, like day to day, I'd say that a game programming job is relatively unstressful. You don't have a lot of those outside stressors on you, right? Even if you did like the worst thing possible, you completely screwed up and ruined everything, nobody dies, right? Like nobody suffers long term. People might lose money, people might not have fun, but there's no stress at all, right? So it's there's no pressure there. Or at least there's no external pressure. Like with a lot of other things, I can imagine like working on airplane code or anything where it's vital and fundamental, and if something goes wrong, everything is a disaster. That would be stressful for me. Working on games, not so much. It's a lot of fun. Plus, you get the constant stress relief of getting to play a little bit in between as you're working on stuff, and having a reason to be playing and trying out other games so that you can work better on the games that you're on. For design, I don't know how stressful it is. Most designers I know always seem stressed, but they also always love their job and they wouldn't want to do anything else. I think it's just the designers I know, or maybe just designers in general, always give off that aura of being stressed. But in general, I would say it's not stressful. Management on the other side, probably super stressful. I've never known anybody who was managing game development and not stressed out about something all the time. There's always something going on that's bothering them. I mean, management in general is you've got to, keep a bunch of people under control and doing the right thing and on task and make promises that you can't control and can't keep. And it's a super stressful thing. So yeah, I would say management's definitely tough. For a submitted question, you can just drop them in chat, by the way. I was just going through the couple that were already submitted yesterday that I thought were really good and just needed to be answered. And I'd kind of not gotten a chance to do them. So I wanted to jump into those. And I'm going to jump over to this next one real quick too, and then I'll take some from chat too, which was, how did you start your game dev career, and do you have any people or any tips for people willing to start in game dev? And this is something I just wanted to talk about because I like talking about it, and I know a lot of people are just interested in getting into the game industry. So if you're interested and kind of curious on how I did it, I'll share my story real quick. So when I'd always been interested in game development and just making video games ever since I was a kid. I had a little Commodore 64 and not enough games to play. I think I had 3 games, and eventually after I beat them all, I kind of wanted to have something else, or after I beat them or got burned out by them all at least. I wanted to create something else or play something else. So I ended up getting these little magazines and learning how to code very badly in there. I wouldn't say learning how to code, learning how to copy code and learning that I could take words on a paper, put them into a computer and make things appear and characters appear and fun stuff happen. So that kind of got me started on the idea of knowing that I wanted to code and get into games, but I had no idea how to do it or that I would. Right? That was just kind of an early thing. Later on in life, I really got into playing a lot of games, and one of the things I really liked to do in games was write scripts to run bots in my games too. So that kind of reinforced the programming a little bit more. And I'd been doing a little tiny bit of programming every now and then just for fun, making little apps for my keyboard. Nothing amazing, don't get me wrong. I mean, we're talking like 20-line little programs before I really got into development, little tiny things that I'd kind of mess around with, the same kind of stuff that I see my kid doing now. Anyway, so I wanted to get into game development, and I started working in actual programming at Intel, doing some server tools. So I'm working on these server tools, and I started just kind of applying for game programming jobs. I had no clue how to do anything, and I would say I was 150% unqualified. Like, not qualified at all, other than I kind of understood how to code a little bit, and I really liked video games. So I applied to a bunch of places and never really got any response. So I would say, when I'm lying, I applied to maybe half a dozen places and then never got a response. And I didn't try nearly hard enough back then as I should have. Instead, what happened for me is I had made a lot of friends, and one of the guys that I had happened to play with, who also worked at the company that I ended up working at, sent me a message randomly and asked me if I'd like to come work on a game with him in the QA department. So the job was initially to do mostly testing and writing some QA tools, because he knew it was a friend of mine that I'd talked to a bit, and he kind of knew I could code, didn't really know how much, just knew that I liked to play games, that I liked to find cheats in games, and that had at least a little bit of coding experience. So I ended up getting hired in as a QA developer, or a QA whatever it was. I was just essentially a QA job with a side job of writing some tools to make QA's job easier, to automate our processes a little bit. And from there, I've recorded a couple videos on the whole process, but 3 weeks later, ended up getting laid off. Got rehired, and it slowly merged and morphed into a game development career where I was working on game tools. So I went from QA tools to game development tools, and then from that into just building actual game stuff. There's no link for the question post, and it's just because there were already a ton of them, and I didn't finish the ones yesterday, and then I'm going to jump into chat questions after we wrap these up. Actually, in fact, let's just talk about some chat questions now, because there's a lot of stuff going on here, and I wanted to talk about it. So, let's see, how do you incorporate an online database into Unity? Let's see, what's that? Crixino asked. There are two ways to do it. Generally, what you want to do is avoid doing it on your client at all. In fact, let's go to camera mode. So you want to avoid doing anything like that on your client. You want just you want to have a client-server based architecture if you're going to use a database where your clients are connecting to some game server. The game server could be a Unity server instance, like it's just maybe a headless Unity instance that's running in Windows or Linux or something somewhere, or it could be an API server like a Node.js or some C# service that you've set up that is taking requests and then saving stuff off to the database and loading things from the database when you need to log in and get your character data and stuff. You don't want your game client directly connecting to the database ever. So I'd say that's the biggest thing, is that you're going to need to put in a layer in there in between. Don't just have a database directly in your game, unless it's like a local database and everybody has their own like little mini SQL version. But in that case, you may be able to just use player prefs and save yourself the pain and not have to have a database. Let's go on to another question. What else did we have up here? Let's talk about C64. That stuff was fun. I miss my Commodore. I was actually looking, they were making a C64 emulator. I don't know if you guys have seen like the little Super NES and NES minis, but they were making a C64 one, or it might already be out. If it is, I need to just grab it because it seems like a fun little thing. I'll think it's fun, and everybody else in the house will think it's terrible games that Dad's a weirdo and wants to play this old junk when they have fun new stuff. But it seems interesting anyway. I want to grab it. Okay, let's see. My question about how can I learn more about game balance? Talking to game designers, I would say. Game designers, that's their job is figuring out game balance. Usually they do it with people who are helping them get some analytical data on it. Like just playing and guessing what things are doing never really lines up right. So you want to get some analytics on like if it's damage balance, like how much damage or is everything actually doing? What is it coming out to? And you need a lot of data to do good balancing, but it can be difficult. And it depends a lot on the scale of the game too. Some things are easy to balance, but I'm thinking about it in a bigger scale. Any resources for .NET developers using Unity? You've mentioned things like mono behavior is like an MVC view. Wondering if there's anything else like that. I don't know if there's anything else that fits directly like that. I'd say that the biggest thing as a standard like .NET developer, so say you're like a web dev or a enterprise engineer, you're working on these .NET C# apps or maybe even Visual Basic apps back in the day. The biggest difference is that your update loop is no longer hidden, right? In all of those platforms, the update loop is abstracted away. It's hidden and you just get event callbacks. In a game engine, the update loop is something that just can't really be abstracted away for some game types. In some game types, you may build a whole abstraction layer and you almost completely abstract away that update loop, and it's very event driven. But a lot of games and subparts of games just won't meet the performance characteristics that they need if you do that. So you have to really take into account that update. And you also have to think about things like garbage collection and just performance in a slightly different way. You have to think about it. It matters more, but it doesn't matter until it does, right? It's like a lot of these things, like you can ignore it, but eventually one day it's going to become a problem and it's going to bite you. If you hit scale, like if your game gets big enough. If your game stays small and you never finish it, never ship it, doesn't matter at all, right? But when it gets big and you start to go out to a bunch of devices, or you start to worry about people on low performing platforms playing your stuff, you have to start actually addressing these things, and it becomes a big paradigm shift then. Okay, what's the name of the book for fame patterns? I don't know. You might be thinking of design patterns. So there's there's a game programming patterns. That might be the one you're thinking of. I would check that out. It's free online too. You can check it out, or you can grab the book on Amazon. I'd get both. Let's see, what was the question here? Are you doing YouTube as a part-time job, Jason? Yeah, it's the thing that I really enjoy doing, but I'd say it's less than half of what I do. And I mean, lately it's been a very tiny chunk of what I do just because I've been too busy with little kids. We'd started foster care stuff, so I got a bunch of little kids running around. So it's foster care and then teaching and course stuff, and then YouTube, and game development, actual game development, and then YouTube kind of falls down below that. So it's been not getting enough love, which is one of the reasons I wanted to do the stream today, just to hop out here and chat with everybody. Let's see, what else? What was the second question, though? If so, do you have any tips and tricks for anybody that's pretty new to game dev and YouTube in general? Yeah, I would say start by making a bunch of games. If you're looking at making YouTube stuff too, just start by making a bunch of videos. When I kicked it off, I forced myself to do just 3 videos a day, or 3 videos a week, not a day, 3 videos a week. And a lot of time I would just record like 3 in a day and just keep going as fast as I could, just getting used to it, because you're going to suck at first, and you got to build up that flow. You got to work out the process and practice and not worry about the quality as much as getting through that process and just doing it. Build up the skills that way a lot better than sitting around and wait. I've just seen a lot of people that sit around and wait and delay and have a thing that they're going to hang on and wait until. And I mean, I've been guilty of doing it myself plenty of times. And every time I catch myself, I just try to fight it. Like, hey, I don't need to wait. I'll just do it now. There's no reason to hold off. So just, I'd say get out there and start doing it. But for actual game making, try making a bunch of different games. Okay, let's see. What else did we have in here? I wonder if I can get the chat version showing up. Let me see. So I can get chat as long as I just show my desktop and pretend it's Jason. Let's just turn him off. Bam, there we go. Now you can have chat show up in here too, maybe. See, chat box, are you working? There we go. Cool. Now chat shows up. Maybe I can make myself bigger too. Let's try that. All kinds of fun things. Now I just totally messed up that scene though. Okay, so let's go through some of these questions again. I use Azure Trials with empty Visa cards for my game servers. Also, would be the best way to implement an anti-cheat pattern or anti-cheat on a multiplayer game to incorporate flags into the game. Interesting. Azure Trials, it sounds like a lot of work to set up to get new Azure Trials over and over, but okay. I could see it. I think they give you, if anybody hasn't used Azure and AWS, they both give you trials when you sign up. So if you need some hosting, or they'll give you free hosting essentially for a year or something, or a month, or some amount of credit. It changes relatively constantly. But yeah, you can get a lot of hosting for free from those guys. So the best way to implement anti-cheat is to ignore, or I wouldn't say ignore, but assume that the client is always lying and that everything that they're trying to send you and everything that they're trying to do is cheating. Always. Just always assume that they're always trying to cheat. And if you do that, you're going to be a lot safer. If you don't assume that, you're going to miss a spot where they're trying to cheat, and they're going to cheat and they're going to break stuff. Never trust the client for anything. Validate everything on the server. And that's pretty much the biggest rule. And never send the client anything more than they need to know. Send them the bare minimum amount of data that they need, nothing extra. Okay, why not make a C64 game clone for the site? That would be a great idea. I think it sounds like a lot of fun. What about security when you implement your database with the API server stuff? So that was when I was talking about making an API for the database. You're going to need some sort of authentication and some sort of token system that you set up. You could say you could build this yourself, or you can find examples out there. I haven't built one in quite a while, but they're not very complicated. The hardest part is just making sure that everything is actually encrypted and that you don't miss stuff. And that you actually do the validation on your API, and that you don't just let anybody call into the API endpoints and do whatever they want. So if you want to look up some, I'd say docs and videos on API validation stuff, but it's pretty common, and there's just a lot of info out there about it. But essentially, you do a handshake and an authentication, get a token, and then you use that token in your messaging. Okay, let's see what else we got here for questions. What about optimization? How to check and test an app for good performance? Are there any tools? There are some tools out there that will kind of automate this and run it on different devices for you. I don't remember them anymore because I haven't had to do mobile stuff in a little while. But when it comes to performance in general, the best thing that I'd like to do, or the thing I would recommend doing, is diving into the Unity profiler. Open up that profiler window. Just go to Window and Analysis, and then Profiler, and run your game and look for spikes. Just start watching, play through it, look for spikes in your game, look for garbage allocations, any part where there's a steady set of allocations, and start addressing those. Just start knocking them out. Also, playing your game, you can usually find some hitches, but I think another important thing is playing your game on your minimum spec device. Don't play your game on only the best device that you have available and avoid it on the other ones because it runs like crap on those. Play it on the other ones and fix the issues, or move your min spec up. Okay, what else we got here? It looks like questions are starting to come in a little bit faster. When I create code, I always namespace. What do you think on this matter? I did too when I wasn't doing Unity projects. Now I would say I put namespaces about 15 to 20% of the time. Most of the time, it's just not. It doesn't apply so much to the projects that I'm working on. And a lot of that is because I'm not sharing and reusing code either between projects. And just namespace is just not a very common habit in Unity development, unfortunately. It probably should be, I'd say, used more often, though. Are you planning on releasing something on the Switch? Nope. No plans for that anytime soon. I'm developing a MOBA game. Nice. And my character has several components like health, movement, mana. How should I separate character data from logic to transfer it through the net? So realistically, a lot of that shouldn't be. So All of that data needs to be handled on the server. The server should be the only thing that really knows about movement, speed, probably even health, and everything else. All of that stuff should only be known on the server and then replicated down to clients that are allowed to know about that information. So like your local character might know your health and your movement speed and your mana. You might not even know your movement speed locally because you just don't need to. You probably do though. But other clients are not going to know your health and your mana unless they happen to be in that area of interest and observing you. And so you need to split these things off into observable bits of data that can be observed by multiple players if you're building a MOBA, so that anybody can observe those things or not observe them based on distance, so that people that are there next to you can see you, or that have you revealed can see your stats. People that have a little hack or cheat on cannot see your stats. This is the kind of thing that it's very easy to synchronize all that up and then just try to hide it on the client. But anybody who has any reasonable hacking experience could easily make a client that just makes that stuff available, or make a mod to the client or something else that reads that data. So you have to hide that. And then all of the logic needs to be the client is sending a command like, I want to move here, I want to move here, I want to attack this entity that I clicked on. And that's it. The server is doing everything else. The server is controlling all of the actual logic there. Okay, how do you stop an object from going through another object? I'm very confused in making an RPG game. Usually just colliders and then using the physics system to move things. A lot of the time what I see is people have colliders and then they use transform.position to move things instead of using a rigid body or character controller or something that's using the physics system, so they don't actually stop and bounce. So make sure that you have colliders on both of the things, that they're both 3D colliders, not a 2D and a 3D or something, or they're both 2D if it happens to be 2D. And then make sure that you're moving with something like a rigid body add force, or setting a velocity, or doing a simple character controller move or something like that, and not setting a transform position. Okay, when someone will make a compiler that will bridge between game patterns and programming. So I don't know that that's... I think eventually, realistically, we'll get to like holodeck levels, right? And you'll just walk in, you'll say, hey, computer, do this, and it will understand you. Google Home is already getting, a tiny % of the way there, and I expect things to just get, closer and closer to just it being able to understand what you want to do and doing it. All right, what else we got here? So I have a beginner question. I just started learning C#. Is it normal that I struggle so much just to program character movements? Why is it so hard? Yes. If you just started, it should be relatively hard. And when I say that, like, you got to remember that hard is a big relative term. Back in the old days, like, it was hard to draw a dot on a screen. Then it was hard to draw a character. All of these things were hard, but it got easier. Drawing dots got easier. Drawing characters got easier. Now I'd say that moving characters is relatively easy to do the basics of it. Getting that perfect is still hard, and getting anything like that perfect is gonna take quite a while. And I wouldn't expect to be great at game development or programming right away. I would say it takes years to become really good at something, just like anything else that you start off with. Start playing an instrument and all of a sudden you play like a famous musician, right? Or you can play any song you want and do whatever you want. You learn slowly, and you pick up skills, and you just kind of get better over time. And the more that you practice, the more that you play, the more that you build things, the better you're going to get, and the faster you're going to do it. So I wouldn't expect to come in and just know how to do everything and be able to do everything. Just as long as you're making constant progress, and every day you're trying stuff out, you're learning something new, you're going, okay, hey, I figured out one new thing. I'd say then you're on the right path at least. Okay, what # we got here? Should I learn a full C# course to do Unity 3D? I would go with a Unity specific course, not a C# non-Unity course. Like, don't do a web development or a Windows development course, because the patterns and the way that they do things are going to be different, and it's going to be confusing when you then have to switch over and do something else. It'd be like if you wanted to learn how to play guitar, but you learned how to do I don't know, like the flute first. Like, I'm going to learn the flute first because it's music too. I'd say it's close, and it is related. If you have previous C# experience, it helps a ton, but I wouldn't go to learning C# and then Unity. Learn them together as a bundle, I'd say. I made a couple of small games on Android and some on the PC, but still don't know how to how to get money in this. Okay, so you're releasing things solo but not having much luck, I assume, finding a job. I would say the biggest thing here is making sure that you're actually applying for things and that you're applying for a lot of things and applying for things that you might think that you're not necessarily qualified for. Most of the time, job descriptions, I've talked about this before, most of the time job descriptions are crap and they list a bunch of things that nobody cares about or one person loosely maybe cares about. I don't know how many I've never been at a job where the job description didn't list, at least 3 or 4 things that had absolutely nothing to do with the job and were just something that somebody thought of that might maybe fit on the list. The requirements are almost always put together by, hey, send me the things that would be good. 1 or 2 people send some things, they ask for a couple more things, and then they kind of slap together a list. They're very, very rarely accurate. So go out and apply for a lot of things, especially if you hit the core thing. Like if they're building Unity games and you've got Unity experience, good enough. Go for that. Don't assume that you also need experience with these other 3 platforms and this language that one little tool that they might use one day has. Just get out there and apply for it. The worst thing that can happen is you don't get the job that you already don't have. Like there's no downside. Okay, let's scroll up and see if we can get a couple other ones here. What was this one here? Just trying to read through. What's the best way to save and load games? And the best way to implement autosave. The easiest way and the way that I would start is just by using player prefs. So you can have a simple object that loads your game state from player prefs and another one that saves your game state off to player prefs, and just have a save call and a load call that loads up and fills out all of the objects. It depends on obviously the complexity of your game. That might need to include a bunch of other systems. You might need to pass in an inventory system or link it to some other systems or something. But in general, just using player prefs handles the majority of saving and loading, and it works across all devices. It's easy to use and it just gets the job done. Okay, let's see. I've been struggling to get a game dev job. Is it better to develop a bunch of small mobile games or a couple medium-sized games to get into the industry? Really, you just need one thing that stands out is enough, right? Like one good portfolio piece that really stands out as interesting, unique, and polished can be enough. You don't necessarily need a whole bunch of things. I think building a bunch of things helps because it gets you to that one thing that's really nice and neat and polished. But you don't necessarily need to build a bunch of games to get into the industry. Once you can build a game, if you can build a medium-sized game on your own, I'd say the things that are going to stop you are going to be location, mainly environment. It's environment or yourself not applying for the jobs. So either there's nothing around where you are, and finding a remote thing is just difficult for where you are, or that you're not applying for them. Because there are, thing is, like in today's, like with everything going on right now, I don't know if that still applies as of this week, but in general there are a lot of game development jobs out there and a lot of jobs that just use game engines to get work done out there. I'd say get out there and just start applying right away. If you're at the point where you're building mid-level or mid-sized games, just start applying for jobs. What's the best tool for ads and analytics? I'm not really sure. I know Unity has some built-in stuff. I'd probably just default to that if I was jumping into it now, though. But it's been a while since I had to dive into those. And I used their analytics stuff, too. It was pretty good. It was years ago. The only downside that I had back then was that it was slow to update. But they've probably changed that in the last couple of years since I looked at it. Okay. Hey, Jason, is it worth giving up game development because the game market is getting more competitive and you fear your game won't see the light of day? How should one motivate themselves? So I wouldn't give up game development because of that. I do want to point out that it's always harder and riskier to be an indie game dev launching your own game, because you've got not just one job, but a dozen jobs all bundled into one, and you have all of the risk right there too. So it can be rough, especially if you spend a lot of time and energy and your soul into a game, and then it ships and just doesn't either it doesn't ship or it goes out and it's just not what you expected or not what you wanted. That part can be really rough. I still wouldn't give up game development, even if you find yourself in like a terrible situation like that, where like the game is just not going to make it out and things are going to fall apart. I'd still make a transition and just work at a game company in the industry instead of jumping all the way out. But for motivating yourself, I think for me the biggest motivating factor is always just I think about the job that I do, and I think about what I would do if I didn't have the job, and I think about all the other jobs out there available. If I didn't program games for a living, I would program games for fun. Like realistically, I would just make games for fun. I might do it a little bit less. I might make slightly different types of things every now and then, but I would still code games for fun. I would make games for fun with my friends, whatever. I would have a blast with it. I mean, realistically, gave me $1 billion, I'd probably buy a giant mansion, invite a bunch of my friends to come live in wings of it, and have a game studio in the middle so we could just work on games but never have to leave home, right? Like, just have a game studio at my house. It'd be great. I lost track. I got excited with the whole buying a mansion and starting a game studio in the house. No, let's just do that instead. Right? But I just think about that, and I think about like there's no other job that I would enjoy as much or really love to get into and have fun and like be excited to get up and do. So it that alone is enough to motivate me to stay into it. Just thinking about like all of the other things I could do and the lack of joy that all of those would bring me. Okay, let's get more questions. I see they're starting to fly through. Should lightweight render pipeline be avoided on mobile? I don't think so. I think it's generally recommended for mobile, but everything's kind of moving towards the universal, so I'm not 100% up to date on the pipeline stuff. I'm kind of diving back into that now with 2020. Is it better to use components while creating character architecture or do it some other way? I'd say yes, components or subsystems in the game are what you want to go with. So either subcomponents or maybe they're not actual components like in the Unity sense, but they're subclasses that are on that bigger class. You've got a player with some stats and some inventory and some other thing. That's just a single object or single thing on there, not all part of a bigger class. So it's still all about that splitting it out and that separation of concerns. Can you tell how bigger projects are structured, like network module, characters, modules, shaders, database, overview of the hierarchy? It varies quite a bit. Some projects are very well structured, and with the ones that are generally structured in relatively different ways. I've seen some where the project is broken down to, I'd say, kind of like units of work or parts of code where the code and the art is all bundled into the folder structure. So you've got like a character, it's got all the character code, the character art, the character shaders, it's the shaders, the materials, the textures, maybe the animators and meshes and stuff all in a folder. A lot of the time though, I'd say most of the time it's structured in more of a source or code subfolder and then an art subfolder, and then underneath there some subset of either splitting by type or by game use. So like characters as a subset, environment as a subset, and then breaking from there down in the structure. Database wouldn't necessarily even be in the project itself. If it's an actual database, it wouldn't, I guess, necessarily be in the project, but it's something somewhat related. And yeah, I guess so. I wouldn't say that there's necessarily like a solid structure that I've seen replicated throughout a bunch of places, though. Like I said, I've seen a big variety of it, and a lot of places struggle to keep things clean and keep the folder structure just empty of all the extra junk too. So the best ones are generally keeping those at least well organized in whatever structure works out best for them. Okay, what else we got here? I saw a job here that wanted a Unity dev that knows programming, 3D modeling, animation, and shaders. They probably want very light programming or no programming, or it's a position that is put up by somebody who has very little or no understanding of what the actual pipeline and process is. It could just be that they want somebody who can do enough programming to put in a model and spin it around. But it could also just be somebody who doesn't realize that programming and art are separate things. I've seen that before too. It's rare though. It also could just be terrible job description, right? That they tried to merge a bunch of stuff in they heard of. And yeah. I don't know that I would necessarily apply for that, but I might still apply for it and just ask them more about the position, try to get an idea of what the actual job is. They could just want a programmer who can work their way around in Blender a little bit and fix things up too. As a solo developer, should I focus on creating games for my region or create and market games for the international market? I have no idea. That's a good question. I've never thought about it. I've always just kind of thought about making games for everyone, but I also do it in English in the USA, so it's kind of, I feel like it's kind of biased, so it's not really for everyone. It just happens to be in English, right? Like, I never really gave it much thought. It might be interesting. I know developers who work on releasing games just in their own languages for their own regions, and they have some success with it. I don't know what that actually looks like though, so I don't know. I'm curious if anybody in chat has insight into that though. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on it too. What else do we got here? Hey, I find no matter how much I try to split up my code into healthy sized scripts that do one thing each, I always end up kind of packing more than I want into any one. Any tips on to how to plan ahead? Oh, don't plan ahead. Refactor, extract, and adjust and adapt. You're never going to get it right the first time, and it's always going to slowly grow. And then when it does, and you realize it, you see that seam there, cut it, slice it, and make it its own subclass, or its own class, not subclass, but make it its own component or class and cut it out there. Don't try to pre-plan and pre-architect everything because you're never going to guess it right. Unless it's something that you've already built before multiple times, you're going to make assumptions or guesses are wrong or miss things and not think about them right. So just start refactoring constantly and get used to the idea of refactoring constantly, which is where having unit tests on your code comes in really handy, right? If your if code is all tested, you don't have to worry about breaking stuff when you go in and change it. What else we got here? If you're working from home, then how to make your own office feel like you're really in a working environment. Okay. A couple things you can do. One is to separate it as much as possible from the rest of the environment. So if you're working from home and you're in the kitchen and there are people coming by constantly, there's cooking going on and stuff, a whole lot more distracting, a whole lot harder to get things done. And it's not really like you're going to be able to get into a flow. And when you're working on game stuff or just programming in general, it's easy to just get into a flow, have something on your mind, be able to figure it out and fix it. And the second it's broken, you're like, shit, I'm screwed. I don't remember what I was doing anymore. And it's going to take you another half hour to get back into it. And, 20 minutes in, bam, you get interrupted again by a kid pulling on you and wanting something or just wanting a hug, whatever it is. That little distraction, though, kill that mindset and you forget what you're doing again. And it can be rough. So I'd say separate yourself out as much as possible, visually and physically, so that people aren't touching and walking in front of you. Also audibly, so either with some sound playing or noise canceling headphones or something like that. And then also, once you get it like that, try to make it like a nice, comfortable, fun environment for you too, if you can. But I know it can be hard, so I don't know, like, if you don't have the space available, I don't know what to recommend. My solution was to move into a place where I have the space available because my old office used to be in a loft and there were people coming by constantly. So it made working from home extremely hard. Now my office is kind of like on the edge of the house, way off and separated enough from everything except for the kids' office, which is next to me. And I can just clear them out when I need to work and then let them back in when I don't need to work and they can go do other stuff. Okay, let's jump in. How much time it take to learn C#? I've been learning it for the last, 15 years, and I still learn new things all the time. I learned something new this morning. Thank you so much. Oh, you're very welcome. And let's see. Hey, Jason, which is a better way to move objects using physics components or transform properties? Usually physics components, assuming that you want it to interact with the world in a physical way. So if you want it to bounce off things, push things, move things, use the physics components. If you don't, if you just need a thing that floats through the sky and it's far away and it's just a rendering thing, you might not even need a collider on it. Take the collider off and just move it with the transform. So if you need it to collide, physics. If you don't need it to collide, then you just move it with the transform and probably take the collider off of it. Don't even have one on there. Okay. Thoughts on starting a similar project instead of continuing your last one when learning? I love it. I feel burned out because you focus too much on perfecting and implementation. Yeah, and the reason, I don't even want to read the whole question. The reason is the same thing. Like, you get focused on this one little sub part that's not really the thing that you're super interested in, and you're just trying to hone that down, and then you kind of lose sight of all of the fun, exciting stuff. And you may be at that point where you're ready to kind of, like, it's a learning project and you're ready to jump onto the next one. I like to time box the things that usually, honestly, like 2, maybe 3 weeks at the longest. I think that when you're starting off, you might need to go a little bit longer because it just takes longer to get things in there. But I like to make sure that you time box it and then just kill it and go on to the next one, so that you don't end up in that scenario where you're, if you could really get into it, like when you mentioned that you're trying to perfect networking from scratch, if you really get into it and you're loving doing the networking stuff and loving that optimization part, great. Like, there's no reason to just stop yourself from doing it. Like, you shouldn't just kill it and end it. But if it's just not the part that you're really interested in, and you're not doing it for a really good reason, you're not really learning it and loving it, jump over to the next thing. All right, let's take a couple more questions. I'm going to jump out of here in about 5 minutes. Let's see what else we got here. Freelancing or making your own game? Freelancing is easier to make money at. Making your own game is more fun. I would do both at the same time. How can I improve programming logic? Watch a lot of videos on solid principles and design patterns. Even if they're not necessarily game related, just constantly watch them. Go watch Uncle Bob talk about stuff. You'll feel smarter. Well, you'll feel stupider at first and then smarter after like the 4th or 5th time you've watched them, right? How's development going on on your MMO? Is it in private beta now? It is going great. It is going to another alpha test sometime. I don't have the dates, or even if I did, I'm sure I wouldn't be allowed to release them, but I don't have them anyway. Sometime it'll go into an alpha, sometime soonish, I hope. And then people will get to jump in and play with a lot of the new stuff. And that's a Pantheon MMO. If you just go Google it, you can find out more about it. It's not a free alpha, though. It's a pledging. So there's a whole system there. You can go check it out if you want, or just kind of learn more about it if you're interested. It's fun stuff, though. Fun to work on. Is Pantheon the 3rd MMO you're working on? Actually, yeah, technically, I guess it is. It's the 3rd one they're working on in a longer term. Yeah. And it's fun. It's been interesting taking some things from the previous ones and some of the lessons that I learned on the previous ones, and things that I saw that kind of caused big problems or headaches, or things that architectural decisions that were made that didn't pan out, and understanding why they didn't pan out has been actually really helpful for me, and a lot of fun to kind of bring that into another game. It's fun building the 3rd and 4th iteration of a thing sometimes, when it's not the same thing. Like, if it was just, building number 2 and number 3 of the same thing, it'd probably get boring. But it's been a lot of fun, actually. Hey, Jason, what do you think about Unity certified thing and later to become a Unity instructor? And why did you not apply for that? I think that the Unity certification seems to be growing quite a bit. It's going to be pretty interesting to see what that's like. I haven't taken any of the certifications myself, but I was actually planning on doing it just to go through that process and see what it's like, and see how much there is there. Because last time I really dug into it a lot, there was only one test, and since then they've added a lot, and they've added a lot of extra learning stuff on there, and they made it free. So I'm gonna, or not the certification, not free, but a lot of the training stuff they made free. So I'd recommend everybody just kind of go check it out and dig into it. I'm not 100% sure I know enough about it to really dive into it yet, but I think it's going to be hopefully a big thing in the future. It's good that somebody's making a good big official thing for it, even if it takes a while to grow. Like, it would be good because people kind of have like this standard of at least you have this set of knowledge. It's kind of like a minimum bar to meet whatever the level is, and that could be like a entry level, or it could be a senior level. So I think it's interesting stuff. I'm definitely interested in it and looking at it more now. Is it possible to have a tile map inside a subscene instead of a ton of game objects? It's a good question. I don't know. I haven't played with tile maps lately. Or I haven't actually tried doing it like that. I don't know. I'm not sure. Sorry. When I make a package let's say a loading screen, and then I add things to it in one project, and then my other project is missing the thing I added. Is there a way to sync that part? So one thing I've seen people doing that might work well is using a package in the package manager. So you can actually set up a Git repo and make that a package source, and then you can just do an update on the package. So that way it wouldn't necessarily be in your assets folder, it would be more in that packages, and then it would kind of work like a normal Unity package instead. So that could solve the problem. Other than that, having it just in a sub repository or linked repository in a Git repo could do it too. Outside of the thing is like both of these require Git, so I don't know of a good solution outside of that for shared package management though. Other than like exporting a package, none of that's really automated and easy though. Okay, let's see. Do you ever use any utility classes in your game? Something to hold cached references and helper functions. Not like generic helper functions. Usually what I'll do is I might create a subset of helper classes for some unit tests or something, or as a placeholder while I'm figuring out my class architecture. But I try not, what I like to avoid having is like a big helpers class that's got all of these static methods in it. I generally try to avoid that because I don't find them to be super discoverable or an easy way to understand how the project works. I prefer to have that logic baked into the objects and the classes that are using the stuff if I can. There may be some scenarios where it makes sense, but a lot of the time those can just turn into extension methods instead. Okay, I'm making an open world game. What would you recommend me do? Subscenes for bits of the maps with objects or a huge tile map? Probably, depending on the type of game, either some sort of voxel type system that's procedurally generating it or subscenes. One of the other things we've been looking at though with Pantheon is doing some streaming tiles and chunks for pulling in Houdini stuff. So exporting it in there and then pulling it in chunks. It could be another option too for doing like large streamed worlds. And a lot of it I think depends on what type of game it is. How large actually large is. Like, can you just load all of the stuff into memory? How much of it can you load into memory? How much do you need to worry about performance? And how, like, if you can just load in subscenes and just do like 9 chunks of data around you and just load the 9 areas around you and that works and it's good enough, I would, go with that. If that's not going to meet the performance that you need though, then there are other options out there, but they get, I'd say, quite a bit more complex. But just having like the 9 scenes around you or 9 bits of data around you, which is like, say like the scene that you're in and then the 8 surrounding you, right? Like, or surrounding you like that. Or do my circles in a way that makes sense on a camera, right? That might be enough for it. And then, you move to the next one and then the other 3 around there load and the 3 behind you unload. All right. I think that was all of the questions in chat. I was able to get through them. There was one more, I think, that was on that form that I wanted to hit real quick before I wrap it up, though. Let me see. Oh, nope, that was all of them. I think I got them all. Cool. Okay, well, I don't know. If you guys had fun, had more questions, and want to do this again, just leave a comment and a thumbs up or something. If these keep getting enough views and enough interest, then I'll just keep doing them and maybe make them somewhat regular thing while everybody's kind of stuck at home. Just talk about game development stuff. How would you fund your first indie game if you didn't have any savings? I would build up some savings first. I would say if you're going to stop working for somebody, save up money, cut your expenses down as low as possible, and give yourself a good 6-month buffer where you don't necessarily have to make any money for at least 6 months. If you're starting your own indie game, you're going to need even more than that because it's going to take a lot more than 6 months before you start your game, kick it off, release it, and start to see money coming in, and you're going to need a buffer in case that doesn't happen. You're going to need to be able to go out and find something. The last thing you want to do is kick it off, start it, and then part way through you have to go constantly find part-time contract jobs, and you never end up getting your game done because you didn't have any buffer for yourself. So build up some buffer, and then that's the biggest thing, cut your expenses to as close to zero as possible, and then dive into it. Unless, of course, you can build up a big buffer, then you won't care about your expenses, right? All right, yeah, I'm going to cut it here just because I'm running out of breath and getting a sore throat. And yeah. I'll be back, though. Maybe we can do this again tomorrow or later this week. Like I said, if you guys are interested, just remember to like, subscribe, share, and all that stuff. If these things are popular, we'll keep doing them. Yeah, that's all I got. Thanks again, everybody. See you soon.